Hello everyone, welcome back to our book club.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to our book club discussion. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Daryl.
And I am Miss Maka.
Today we are going to talk about Our Mutual Friend
By Charles Dickens.
We love Dickens here.
Yeah, of course, we do.
I've got a bit of a quote to tell you to sort of set the stage for this book. And this was said by Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in
from
Wonderland.
the Wonderland, yeah, our favorite author as well.
He said, one novel has been all my reading. Our Mutual Friend, one of the cleverest that Dickens has written.
Yes, and there is one more quote from the book itself, which would give you a little bit clear impression what is the story about. It goes like this: "Oh, make me poor again, somebody, I beg and pray, or my heart will break if this goes on like this. Pa, dear, make me poor again and take me home. I was bad enough there, but I have been so much worse here." So I think the main character or somebody really wants to go back to the old days.
Do you want to go back to the old days, Maka?
I really miss my childhood, Mr. Daryl, so I think I would go there for a few weeks maybe.
No, even now you're still a child at heart.
Thank you very much, of course. But of course, before we start discussing our book, let's look at our agenda that we have. So firstly, we introduce you to the new vocabulary. Then we will tell you a few words about the author, Mr. Charles Dickens, one more time. Then, of course, we'll give you the short summary of the book.
From there, we will look at the characters. An important part of any story, the way the story moves forward, is through the characters. We'll look at the setting and then finish with some main themes.
Sure. So, of course, the end of the program is giving you homework.
Did you enjoy homework when you were a child?
It depends. Like some homework, yeah, but some, no.
That's a good answer. Let's move to the vocabulary section now. We have selected a couple of words for you, and we will open them up for you now. The first one is heiress. So the initial H is silent. Heiress, heiress. A woman who inherits or has the right of inheritance, especially a woman who has inherited or will inherit considerable wealth.
The
next word is unreasonable. Unreasonable. Not reasonable, not rational, acting against reason, not guided by sound judgment. Next word, allegation. Allegation, an assertion made with little or no proof. And, well, when you make an allegation against someone, you do this, the next word, accuse. You accuse them of something. In this, the meaning is to find fault with, to blame, or to make a formal claim of offense against someone by law. The next word is apparent. Apparent, capable of being easily perceived or understood, plain or clear.
Ashkara.
Our next word is foundling, an infant or a small child found abandoned, a child without a known parent or guardian.
Napovni baushwi.
Our next word is faithful, strict or thorough in the performance of duty, true to one's word, promise, vows, and so on.
Ertkuli, loyaluri.
And our last word, obtain, to obtain, to come into possession of, to get, to acquire something, sometimes by effort as well.
Mireba, mopoveba.
Well, now that we have these words set and clear in our heads, let's have a look at the author.
Sure.
Charles Dickens was an English writer, social critic as well. In his lifetime, his works were very, very popular, and he is considered a literary genius because of his characters. His characters are so real and so distinctive and so memorable that they give him his reputation. And to this day, his novels and short stories are quite popular.
Yeah, so he was born in 1812 in Portsmouth, so on the southern coast of England. Charles Dickens left school, and although, despite the fact that he didn't have a formal education, he actually edited a weekly magazine, journal, for 20 years. And he wrote 15 novels, 5 novellas, and hundreds of short stories and non-fiction articles. Learned and performed excessively, was a really better writer than, and campaigned vigorously for children's rights, education, and other social reforms.
So a very accomplished writer.
Exactly.
He is considered the genius of his age, with the Christmas Carol, which we've talked about before. That remains popular and has inspired adaptations in many different media. So Dickens' genius was praised by different fellow writers like Lev Tolstoy to George Orwell and G.K. Chesterton for its realism, comedy, prose style, unique characterizations, and social criticism. On the other hand, Oscar Wilde, for example, criticized him for excessive, exaggerated scenes and not very realistic. He was such a master of character, in fact, that we have an adjective, Dickensian, which describes poor social conditions sometimes, or comically repulsive characters.
Yes, and he died of the stroke in 1870s. And he was buried in Poets' Corner at Westminster Abbey. Thousands of mourners come to say goodbye to the writer.
Okay, on that point, let's have a question for the audience. What are some of the most notable features of Dickens' style? We talked about just now, but summarize.
As Mr. Daryl already said, term Dickensian is used to describe everything connected to Charles Dickens and his writings, which is characterized by poor social conditions and overly repulsive characters.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. That's a very good answer, right? Okay, so now it is time to move to our summary part. Get ready to draw up a chart, because our mutual friend has ton of characters to keep straight, and it can be a little tricky, and because any of the characters are, not because of that the characters are boring or something, but because, if anything, they are too dynamic.
That's a good problem to have. Published in 1864 and 1865, Our Mutual Friend is Charles Dickens's last completed novel, and it shows. When you start reading this novel, you might wonder what happened to the idealistic, sentimental Dickens of earlier years. For example, in Oliver Twist. The early chapters of Our Mutual Friend, today's book, are jaded, bitter, sarcastic, and it's tough to find a hero to support in this novel.
Yes, and the plot of Our Mutual Friend actually evolves around the murder of John Hammond, a man who was supposed to return to London to inherit the fortune from his estranged father and marry a woman named Bella. Well, too bad John Hammond is dead. Or actually, is he?
So the fallout from this murder means that the big inheritance goes to Mr. and Mrs. Boffin, two naive servants who tend to think the best of people, so they trust a lot. But guess what? In the world of Charles Dickens, there are tons of people willing to do anything to take advantage of such people. And that means a whole lot of blackmail follows, murder, and double-crossing.
Okay, so Mr. Darrell, after listening to everything this, still, what is Our Mutual Friend about? So almost everyone in our mutual friend has some kind of secret agenda and a secret identity to match. For example, John Hammond actually pretends to be dead and invests in a few aliases in order to learn more about truth and more about love. And the Lamels pretend to be rich so that they can marry with money. Like they think that this is the reason they could make up a family. And Mr. Fledgeby actually pretends to be the gentleman of leisure, so he can scam people with his money. So there are lots of characters pretending to be someone else.
So John Harmon, the Lamels, Mr. Fledgeby, is anyone, Ms. Maka, actually being themselves, being who they truly are?
The reader will see it by himself or herself, but before thinking about Charles Dickens that he is a paranoid person, consider all of the daily interactions. Yeah, you are one individual with, for example, your grandmother, your father, your mother, but you're also a bunch of different people, different character in your life. So I think that it is something that is real about us. So I'm sure you behave different in a different way, right, with different people.
We all have masks that we put on for different people.
Yeah, or should we even call these masks or just our different characteristics?
On that point, the characters of this novel are, of course, the main thing, the best thing about it. If you love Dickens' characters, this is the ultimate novel to read, because everything is completely to the max in this one. There's a huge cast of characters. There's a lot of characters to look at and think about, and everything you love in a Dickens novel is here twice over.
Yes, and as we already mentioned, there are lots of characters in this book, and now let's ask a question to our audience. So do you think using many characters in a book, in a story, make the story even more interesting?
Yes, I think it does. It makes the story more dynamic and unpredictable because each character has his or her own personality and acts differently.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, characters make a novel more interesting, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And having many characters in a story, I think, will help the more readers to relate themselves to the characters.
To someone in the book.
Yeah, exactly. Why not?
Speaking of characters, we should start with our look at some of them. First we have Mr. John Harmon, otherwise known as John Rokesmith, otherwise known as Julius Handford.
Yeah.
So a lot of aliases, as Ms. Maka had said earlier. John Harmon spends much of the novel hiding his true identity, and he uses two different aliases. He is the heir to a large fortune, but he has lived a lonely and isolated life, and perhaps because he's been hiding himself for so long. And he's not worried, he is worried actually, sorry, at the prospect of marrying a woman he doesn't know.
Yes, and actually hiding his identity allows him to help and protect the Boffins and observe Bella. So this is Bella, who he later falls in love with. And like at the end of the novel, John is restored to his identity and fortune and position, but only now he knows exactly who his true friends are, and he is sure that his wife loves him.
Let's look at Bella Wilfer, as Maka alluded to. She's the beautiful, charming young woman who's grown up in a family with a modest income. No story would be perfect without the beautiful young character, I suppose, with the strange prospect of knowing that she will someday marry a man she has never met. She is both relieved and frustrated when John Harmon is at first pronounced dead.
Yeah, so her move into Buffin's house helps her to live like a wealthy woman, but she spends much of the novel like being obsessed with marrying into money. So she rejects John the first time because he does not have a fortune. But as she matures, she realizes that she should follow her heart and not this obsession to marry into money.
Speaking of Buffin, let's look at naughty Buffin, this other character. He begins his life as a humble employee of Mr. Harmon, even though he's not well educated. He is faithful and kind, so he's a good man. After he inherits the fortune, he continues to show kindness and goodwill to everyone, though his innocence makes him easy to take advantage of.
Yeah, however, Buffin also shows himself as capable of being cunning, since he successfully deceives Bella into believing he is actually becoming a cruel and greedy man. Yeah.
The plot thickens. We have Mrs. Buffin as well now, the wife of Noddy. She seems more socially conscious than her husband, but more interested in what the changing social status means for her personally. So she is very kind and unpretentious at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And she is also quite nurturing, although even though she has no children of her own, she actually treats Bella much like her daughter. And in this case, we can see her as a sweet woman.
Let's move on to another character. There are a lot. Mortimer Lightwood. He's a lawyer whose professional practice focuses on the Harmon family and their inheritance. His social circle intersects with many of the other characters, including Rayburn, the Veneerings, that's a good name actually, and the Boffins, which leads him to observe many of the novel's major events as a lawyer.
Yes. And our next character is also a lawyer, Eugene Rayburn. So he is a close friend of Mortimer Lightwood. He falls in love with Lizzie almost as soon as he meets her. But he speaks much of the novel being indecisive and unclear about his intentions. Here also we see different types of behavior with different people.
A lawyer who's a romantic. That's unusual. He can be somewhat lazy and short-sighted, as when he torments a certain character without realizing how much danger he puts himself into. And after he has a near-death experience, which means when he nearly dies but then survives, he becomes more mature and grounded, and then shows his integrity by marrying Lizzie.
Yep. Now I think it is time for our question.
Why does John Harmon pretend to be dead?
John Harmon pretends to be dead because while hiding, he can help and protect Buffins while observing Bella, since he's in love with Bella.
Yeah.
If I was in love with someone, I'd pretend to be dead.
Exactly. Or would you like to observe someone from the other side to see whether he or she behaves this or that way?
Yeah, no. I mean, so like John Harmon, there's something wrong with him, of course, to be doing that. And the interesting thing is to find out why he is like that as you read the novel.
Of course. So now let's look at the setting of the story. So the Wayne part in 1860s of England, and in fact the adjective Dickensian refers firstly to relating to or similar to something described in a book of the 19th century English writer Charles Dickens, especially living or working conditions that are like kind of below unacceptable standard, and only secondly to writers by or in the style of Charles Dickens. So firstly the social class things and then the writer's style.
Oh, very good. And now the where of the story. Most of the story takes place either in the streets of London or along the River Thames. In many of his books, Dickens describes his London setting with painstaking detail, but in this one, the detail is more on the river and along the river.
And I don't want to confuse the reader. Like when Charles Dickens describes this part of the city or the period, it doesn't mean that there was nothing good. Only he is focused on the bad side of this time or the city, right? Okay, now let's look at the main themes, and the very first main theme that we have chosen for you, of course there are lots of other themes, is greed. So this is an important theme in the novel. It is displayed primarily in the attitude characters show towards money, and but also sometimes in their attitude to power and social status, or even some other individuals.
There's a drive to get more by all the characters in this novel. It's a major force in the novel. They all want to get more. From the glittering parlors of the veneering set to the muddy shores of the Thames, they're all looking for gold somehow.
Yeah, exactly. So in perhaps the most extreme example, for example, we can say Bradley is greedy when he really wants to possess Lisa as his wife and her to be only his, despite her own lack of interest. While in all these cases, greed is shown to be very toxic and corrupting force, characters such as Bella and Mrs. Lemel also signal that it is possible to break free from being greedy. So even if you have this greed in your personality, they think that you can change it.
It might be a good question to ask our audience.
Exactly. So do you think it is possible to break free from being greedy?
Well, I think yes, it's possible to change one's personality. I mean, if you work hard on yourself, you can always change your personality.
A very hopeful message for the listeners and for the readers. Thank you very much. And yes,
very hopeful young people we have in the audience.
Yeah, exactly. And I also do agree with him. Of course, if you have a very strong desire, you can change even your own personality.
But you are a child at heart, so it's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Our next theme is money. Money is the element that drives most of the plots in the novel, including the significance of the Harmon murder. Harmon's disguise of himself as a roguesmith, the tricking of Bella, the deceptions of Fledgeby and the Lamels, these are all examples of that.
Yes, and it is actually the typically seen as the force that brings out the worst out of characters and encouraging them to cheat, to lie and deceive one another. Yeah, it's very important to see different characters lying so freely as if they didn't do any harm.
So therefore, money is better seen as an amplifying force of the novel, strengthens all of the other themes as well, rather than a corrupting one. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad, both.
Yeah.
And we have one last theme to talk about.
Yes, and this is, I guess, marriage.
The novel does portray some happy marriages, including the Boffins, Bella and John, Rayburn and Lizzie. But Dickens specifically shows different class backgrounds and social standings should not be an obstacle if both partners truly love one another.
Yes, exactly. This is one part. However, many of the marriages in the novel that we see are less successful. Like the Wilfers frequently do not get along with his wife, Mrs. Wilfer, regrets her marriage actually, while the Lemels both believe that they are deceiving the other. Okay, so they are kind of living in a lie. That's how they feel, and are horrified to learn that neither of them is wealthy. And old Mr. Hammond attempts to use marriage as a kind of weapon and method to control his son. Yeah, this is how they use these marital status.
So in that case, in that sense, marriage is used in the way money is used. It can be a force that amplifies good, or it can be a force to amplify bad. Depends on the person.
Of course, and feelings,
and the partner.
How they feel about marital status.
Okay, good.
And family.
Let's ask a question and finish up this section. Do you think a person can become greedy because of his poverty status?
It's really hard question to answer, but yes, I think that poverty can really influence a personality in a negative way, and a person should always fight against those negative thoughts and not let poverty change him in a bad way.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I guess that's all from the discussion part. And now it is time to wrap up everything. Of course, we started with the author himself, Mr. Charles Dickens.
Then we had a look at the summary, and very quickly, it's about John Harmon's murder, the man who's supposed to return to London to a large fortune, but doesn't work quite out.
Exactly. Then, of course, we showed the characters, and I would just like to remind you that this is the book with the tone of different characters.
Remember, the setting is the 1860s in London.
And the main themes that are very connected to each other. The very first one is greed, the second one is money and marriage. That we've shown that this, like the marriages in this book are very, very dependent on money.
Let's have a look at the words now, one last time. We had faithful, heiress, to obtain, to accuse, allegation, foundling, unreasonable, and apparent.
And Mr. Darrell, now I think it is time to give our homework.
We want you to create a brief character study of Eugene Rayburn. What does he look like? What are his positive personality traits? What are some of his negative characteristics as well? What motivates him at this point in his life?
ჩაატარეთ მცირე მოკვლევა ერთ-ერთი გმირის, იუჯინ რაიბერნის შესახებ. როგორია იგი, რა დადებით და უარყოფით თვისებებს ფლობს და რა წარმოადგენს მის мотивაციას.
Great, and they should send their answers to the address you see on the screen right now.
დავალებები გამოაგზავნეთ ეკრანზე მითითებულ მისამართზე.
Well, that wraps up another a look at Charles Dickens, possibly our favorite writer.
Yeah, exactly. I do really respect his style and his books and his vision, to be honest.
I like his insight into characters.
Exactly.
I wonder what he'd say about the two of us.
Yeah, I think he would like it. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, the audience, for these interesting discussions and answers.
And thanks to the TV audience who watch us through the magic of television.
And I'm really looking forward to meeting you next week.
Have a great week, and until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.